I lived with my nana for the majority of my childhood. Her house was about 150 years old, give or take. The upstairs consisted of a big room connected to another bedroom, a bathroom, and an attic door. The attic was a room connected to mine. In the attic, there were two secret rooms which I've never been in. It was just known that they were there. So there have been plenty of paranormal things that have happened at my nana's house. I'm almost 16 now, and when I was about 4, I was playing hide and seek with my uncle, my uncle's friend, and 3 of my friends. In my room, I had a cot for a bed, so it was able to be folded in half, so I chose to hide in it. My uncle came, looked around the stairs, but didn't find me. After a few minutes, I heard him yell, "Forfeit," so I came out. I was about to head downstairs when I heard something behind me. When I turned around, I saw 2 or 3 dark figures walking into the closet. My uncle had left it open. A feeling of dread washed over me, and I screamed at the top of my lungs and went to run downstairs, but I fell, injuring my arm. My nana and parents came running into the foyer to find me laying at the bottom of the stairs, sobbing. Upon investigation, the closet door was closed. My parents and I ended up switching rooms, and I'm still deathly afraid of the upstairs at my nana's. Another instance was when he was around 9. He and his mum were sitting on the couch watching TV, when he saw a pure black entity going into him in his mum's room. After that, he flipped out and wouldn't go back there for months. My aunt was about 18 now and coming home with a boyfriend. Through the window, she saw her mum watching the TV. My nana looked at them, and my aunt explained that the look on her face was pure evil. My aunt turned to go inside, and the TV was off, and her mum was in bed. It had only been a few seconds, and not nearly enough time for an older woman to get to her bed so fast, and in pyjamas and asleep. The last instance is my own story. It happened 2 summers ago when I turned 13. It was about a week after my birthday, and I was going to spend the week with my nana. My uncle was still living with his mum to help take care of her. I hadn't gone into my nana's room yet because I slept with her when I came over. I had been there a few hours and was going to go to the restroom. The room was dark, and as I started feeling an overwhelming sense of fear, I can't exactly remember this moment because I blacked out or something, but I got the rest of the story from my uncle and nana. I stopped at the doorway and stared for a few moments, then released a blood-boiling scream. My nana lunged over, turned on the bedroom light, and I was shaking and crying. My uncle started saying, "What's wrong? What happened?" My nana begged me to tell her what I saw, and all I mumbled was, "The dark man." We sat at the table for hours after that, and noticed that the little pull thing that comes down from the fan was spinning wildly, though the fan's off. I have many more stories from this house, and one of the neighbours who has lived next to it her whole life has told us so many stories, ranging from a young woman who hung herself there, to people being stabbed, to even a meth head family who would jump out of the windows and beat people in there. Tonight, August 4th, 2019, at around 10:15 p.m, my aunt and I were on the porch when my aunt saw something in the sky. It was like an outline of a circle, and part of it was gone. We noted that this was not where the moon usually is, as it's usually behind our house, so eclipse and moon are ruled out. The thing was bright yellow and had an orange or red tint to it. It almost looked like a fireball. We thought it was a shooting star at first, but it wasn't moving anywhere. It started like flattening out and then started to shrink into a smaller form and kind of looked like a star. Then all of a sudden, it disappeared. A few minutes later, it suddenly reappeared and got bigger and bigger. It looked as if the moon would have been over the sun and coming off of it. The light around it kind of spread out again, then suddenly it started getting smaller again, but then it split into 2 and completely disappeared again. We waited to see if it would come back, but it didn't for a 3rd time. I started doing some searching, and I found nothing for solar or lunar eclipses, no meteor showers, no comets, nothing of that sort for tonight. After doing some more searching, two other people saw almost the same thing 3 days ago, around the same time. My aunt stepped back outside and called me over fast. There was what looked like a pretty low plane flying with two large wings. On one side was bright red, and the other bright green. This plane was coming from the same area we saw this mystery light thing, and when the plane got behind our house, I ran to look at it, and couldn't see it at all. My aunt and I have been trying to come up with logical explanations, but nothing makes sense at all. And I don't want to claim aliens without some other people's opinions. Before getting started, I want to give you a brief backstory on me, the town, and the church that I grew up in, so that you can better understand the situation. I come from a small town in northern Minnesota, where everybody literally knows everybody. Growing up, I attended the same Lutheran church that my family has attended for generations, since before the structure was brought from the country into town in the 1940s. I know every corner and sound in that church, as I might as well have lived there growing up. I know a lot of the history, but unfortunately not enough to answer some of the questions I have about who is haunting it. For my family and I, this started in 2012. The pastor was taking a vacation since he was struggling with depression and had just recruited me to take up the job of typing, printing, folding, and distributing bulletins to our church and our sister church in the country. My father, brother, and sister would often help with the tasks of printing and folding. Since we're so bad about procrastinating, this usually happened at the last minute, later on Saturday night. One day, when we were all on our way to church to work on the bulletins, my dad and brother were telling my sister and I about what had happened to them on two separate occasions weeks before. My dad is a deacon for the church and had brought my brother along late on these Saturday nights to help him set up for communion the next Sundays. Now, the church used to have this old rotary phone for decades before someone finally decided to upgrade to a newer model in 2010. The phone is in the basement, right outside the door of the kitchen. Outside the kitchen, there is a larger room with a bunch of tables for when we have potluck or adult Sunday school. My dad and brother were in the area with the tables, not far from the kitchen, when they heard the old rotary phone start to sing. If you're old enough, you remember that those phones made more of a betraying sort of noise, much different from the phones they have now. My dad didn't pick up because A, he was in no mood to talk to anyone on the phone. B, who calls a church that late in the evening when no one is likely to be there, and you can find the pastor's number in the phone book? And C, Dad knew they had a new phone that didn't ring like that. So they kept working, but the rotary phone that wasn't there anymore kept ringing from the same wall on which it used to hang. The second Saturday that my dad and brother were there, they were in the basement again, working on communion, when they heard steady, heavy footsteps walking up and down the aisle between the pews upstairs. The actual chapel was right above where the basement is, and those footsteps didn't stop, didn't step up where the altar is, didn't come out of the chapel, just steadily walked back and forth, up and down the aisle, for the whole period of time they were there. And they would have known if someone else was in the church. They had already been to the altar to collect the items needed for communion. Any of the doors leading into the church aren't far, and if someone had come in, they would have said hello so they wouldn't spook my dad and brother. Fast forward a few weeks to us working on the bulletins in the basement. I had been a little spooked by what had happened and kind of pissed that they hadn't told our mum, my sister and I sooner. We finished folding and counting the bulletins, and Dad had found an old photo album under the desk the printer sits on when he heard those steady, heavy footsteps again. This time, they're coming from the staircase that leads from the altar into the kitchen, just across the basement from us. We couldn't see the actual stairs, but it was obvious that someone was walking and wouldn't pause at all, not even to turn around and go back up or down the steps. My siblings and I were shitting our pants and trying to talk Dad into maybe looking at the photo album another time. when some spirit or something was walking up and down the staircase, not 30 feet away from us. This was my first real experience with the paranormal. I had watched TV shows and stuff about it to be done with friends when I was a kid, and you think that you'll be so brave if that sort of thing actually happens to you someday, but it is freaky as hell. I wanted to go look up those stairs, but I just could not bring myself to do so. I still wish I would have, but I still remember how scary it was, and know that I couldn't have done that. My old math teacher had gone to the same church, and her and my dad got along pretty well, since they're both actual geniuses and math junkies. A few months after the staircase thing happened, my dad said he was talking with her after church when he brought up what had happened to us. She played piano for the Sunday school and would sometimes stay late to organise and practice for Sunday. She said that one night when she was there, she was sitting up by the altar at the piano, which is actually in front of the stairs where we had heard our footsteps, when she hears the steady, heavy footsteps going up and down the stairs leading to the balcony, which is the area of the church that overlooks everything else. Since she's a teacher, she thought maybe some kids were playing a prank on her, and she called out that she knew it was them, just being dumb. It didn't stop, so she got up and went over to look up the steps. Upon looking, the steps stopped, and there was no one there who could have been making them. Keep in mind that she's a very logical thinker. She was the kind of person that wouldn't have lied about anything like this, and I'm pretty sure my dad and maybe her husband are the only people she's told. Originally, I thought that the haunting might be residual, because it was basically just sounds from things or people's past. But I'm questioning that, because the footsteps occur in different places. Since then, if I've ever had to go into that church after 8, I've always been really on guard. I don't think it's anything bad. I think it just sounds like some spirit is confused or something, and it takes place in the basement as well, which was obviously an add-on after the church was moved in town, which leads me to believe that whoever it is in there came after the big move. Around January of 2016, my dad moved into a new home following his divorce with my mom. As we were unpacking boxes, he was singing and noticed someone singing back to him, near the back of the house, where the bedrooms are. When he looked around to see if anyone was in the house, it was empty, of course. Small sounds and occurrences like this continued to happen for a few months. One night, my dad and I were both in our rooms sleeping, when I heard a cluster of voices coming from the hallway. My dad always kept his bedroom door open at night because we have a dog, and he usually also kept the TV on, so I figured it was dialogue from a TV programme. The next morning, my dad asked me if I heard voices in the night. He explained that he could hear them, and they were clearly speaking English, but he couldn't make out exactly what they were saying. I had heard the same thing. Around Christmas of the same year, my dad had set up a small tree with presents underneath it. We had gone to bed, and in the morning, all the presents were moved from under the tree and into the living room at the front of the house. Our groceries were constantly being tampered with. We could hear them rustling through the bags and looking at what we had bought. Small things of mine like hair clips and accessories were constantly being misplaced and replaced in their original spot. After a few months of this, my dad found an article from 2013 regarding a gang-related double homicide at his exact address. A man had come to the house and shot 2 men in the front room while their children were in the home. After the man was apprehended, he was murdered in jail. Ever since then, the noises that we hear don't bother us as much anymore. It's still a little creepy, especially since no one disclosed the homicide when my dad initially bought the house. I've asked one of our neighbours about it, but she didn't like talking about it, and she told me that I shouldn't look into it further. I remember her distinctly telling me not to dig around, because it can upset the spirits in the house. I've always believed in spirits and energy. As a child, and even in my early teens, I had many strange paranormal experiences that I kept to myself for fear that no one would believe me. One of these experiences happened shortly after my grandmother passed away when I was 7 years old. My grandmother had been sick my whole life, and I always had a sense that she wouldn't be around for long. On the night of her death, I was staying at a friend's house and had a horrible dream that she had passed. When I woke up, I distinctly remember feeling that something was not right. As soon as I got home, my parents told me that she had died, and I remember as a child having to process the fact that I knew she was gone before anyone else did. I felt there must be something wrong with me, because these sorts of things didn't happen. The whole situation bothered me for weeks, and I remember lying in bed one night, unable to sleep, despite being exhausted. Being a child, all I knew was to pray. I closed my eyes and asked God to let me go to sleep, and to stop thinking about my grandmother, because I knew she was gone and there was nothing I could do. I immediately felt at peace, until I realised someone was standing over my bed, watching me. I opened my eyes and saw what I can only describe as an angel. The person was neither masculine nor feminine, just a person with a gentle face and expression. The person didn't speak to me, but wanted me to know they were there to keep me safe. I suppose God could have sent down an angel to watch over me and help me sleep. I've also been told that loved ones who have passed away can send down angels to comfort those they left behind. Either way, I know what I saw and how it made me feel. Since then, I've never encountered the angel person again. I have, however, seen mediums who have told me that my grandmother watches over me and takes responsibility for me on the other side. Little things happen here and there that make me think this is true. There are times when I feel as though I'm not alone, even in an empty room. I think of her often, and it's a comfort to me to believe she is out there. When she was just 18, my mom was hit by a city truck that ran a red light. Her collarbone was crushed, and she had slammed her head against the window so hard that paramedics declared her dead at the scene. Despite being revived in the ambulance, her parents were called and told that she had died, and the local news station also reported the incident as having killed her. When she arrived at the hospital, she was alive but unconscious. She remained in a coma for several weeks before waking up in a confused state. At the time, she could not remember what had happened to her in the moments leading up to the incident, nor could she recall anything from her coma. My mother was sent to a rehabilitation centre previously used as a tuberculosis ward in the 60s. While there, she was horribly mistreated by hospital staff, and even recalls being molested and watched while taking showers. I'm a firm believer in the idea that some people, in order to heal from traumatic events, choose not to remember them at all. I also believed, up until recently, that this was the coping mechanism my mom used to overcome the trauma surrounding her incident. However, recently my mom started seeing a therapist in an attempt to unlock the memories of the event in order for her to heal from them further. She called me a couple nights ago after waking from a dream in which she could recall her comatose state. The following is what she told me that she can remember. She told me that she remembers hearing people's voices around her parents crying, and my father staying by her side the entire time, unwilling to leave her even for a second. She remembers hearing many voices all the time and being unable to respond to them. She remembers feeling trapped in a body, unable to move or tell anyone what was going on. She says she can remember waking up and still feeling trapped for a long time, while her body began to adjust to life again. She told me it was the most painful, miserable experience of her life, but that she was so grateful that she could remember it, because she had always been racking her brain for those memories she knew she had. Moral of the story: if someone you care about is in a coma, talk to them, even if you know they can't respond. The sound of your voice will calm them and let them know you are there. Even as a kid, I've always had an interest in the paranormal. the weird. It's an interest that has followed me into my adult life, sometimes to startling effect. Before I begin, I will say that I'd always believed in ghosts and things of that ilk. Yet at the same time, there'd been some skepticism, mostly because, prior to these circumstances about which I'm going to tell you, I hadn't experienced anything concrete, for lack of a better word. 5 or 6 years ago, 2 female friends, Ashley and Lindsay, and I were sitting on Lindsay's bed, shooting the shit and whatnot, not in the slightest prepared for what was about to transpire. At the time, I had known Lindsay for a few years, and Ashley had just been recently indoctrinated into our little clan of friends. Anyway, one of us, I can't remember who, was in the middle of a sentence when out of the blue, Lindsay's cell phone rang. She looked at her phone, and after a few seconds she exclaimed, "The President! Hey, you guys, the President is calling me!" Thinking nothing of it at the time, I took her phone, which is still ringing, and looked at the screen. If you have someone saved in your contacts, when they call you, the contact name is displayed above the phone number. In this case, it was a weird number I'd never seen before, and above said number, it did indeed say, "The President." Her ringtone cut off, call ended. "Do you have someone saved in your contacts under that name?" I asked, to which she replied, "No, I don't think so." "Hang on, let me check." She checked, and there was no one in her contact list under "The President." Weird. Not a minute went by, and we were all still puzzled over this, when the phone rang again above the phone number, "The President." "Answer it," I told her. She did so. Blank line. Called the number back. Zilch, zip, nada. Feeling weirded out and swept by a vague undercurrent of unease, yet curious, I said aloud, seemingly to the air, "Okay, Mr. President, who's sitting to my left?" A minute or so went by, and then again the phone rang. Only this time, instead of saying "the President," it said "Ashley." And she was sitting to my left. This went on for some time, both that night and other nights for a year or more. At one point, at a party down the street, it told me it was my grandma, who at the time had recently passed. I remember breaking into tears right then and there. Once, a few weeks later, at the local dive bar, out on the smoking porch, I had asked the spirit communicating through the phone, what the afterlife was like. "It's heaven, honey." After a while, it had become so commonplace that eventually the novelty of the ordeal died down. That was when things took a turn for the worse. It began to threaten us for ignoring it, saying that it would kill us. At one juncture, sitting around a bonfire, a cartoon image of a skeleton showed up on a screen during one of these aforementioned calls, complete with a yellow flashing background. And then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, it stopped. I still have difficulties wrapping my head around. I've numerous witnesses, from people at the bar to the 2 with whom I'd first experienced it, along with a few hangers-on who were interested in it. And yet, through it all, some skepticism remains. So just to give you guys an idea on what my setup looks like, it started when I was playing CSGO on my PC downstairs. I don't have my own room. My 2 younger brothers and parents sleep in the same room. We just have a separate bed, and my PC is actually under the stairs. And my PC is just a few steps away from our CR, comfort room. It was around 4 AM when I finished playing CSGO, and I started to feel like pissing. I never actually played CSGO that long because I don't like my parents seeing me play and thinking that I did not sleep. So I decided that it was late and I should go to sleep before my parents wake up. I went to our CR, and as I began pissing, I suddenly felt someone was behind me. It didn't immediately send chills down my spine, nor I had goosebumps. I just thought that maybe it was just my imagination, being a skeptical person. But here's the crazy part. This thing, it just made a heavy sigh on my nape. It was like, ah. You can actually feel the air, and the sound it makes made it more terrifying. But to be honest, I wanted to look around, but just thought that I shouldn't. And being a skeptical person, I thought, maybe it was my pee making that sound as it hit the ceramic. So I decided to get a glass of water to pour it down the toilet, but then it didn't make the same sound. And that's when I started to freak out. The chills that I had were so intense that I can actually feel myself getting tired all of a sudden. After realising what happened, I ran upstairs and just slept it off, thinking that maybe I was just imagining things. It started as the usual night that you always have. It always did. So it was the summer of 2017 here in the Philippines. And us Filipinos, if you don't know, we have so many beliefs. It's like woven in our culture. We believe in certain things that other people don't. But me? Not me. I'm skeptical about these things. So here's what happened. We had a store in front. It had a metal roll-up because we sell rice. That was the time when my cousin, he's older than me, stayed at our house. My mom hired him to sell the rice. Every night, we slept in the living room because our room upstairs isn't that big of a room. So we improvised on making a bed where we laid some mattress on our living room so we can actually be comfortable sleeping, even though we're sleeping on the floor. This summer night was different from the summer night that I usually have. My cousin went back to their house to spend the night there, and I was actually sleeping alone. Mainly because why would I be scared of our own house? I've been living here since I was 4 years old, and I was already 21 years old at the time. So midnight came. I think it was around 1 or 2 when I felt like sleeping. Okay, I'll give you an idea of what our house looks like. It was a 2-story house, and we had our stairs in the middle of the house, in which it divided our living room from our kitchen and dining room. So if you stand by the living room, you could actually see a part of the kitchen. So there I was, about to sleep, when I decided to turn off the lights in the living room. But because our house is small, I can leave the lights in our kitchen open so that it wasn't that dark. Then, upon laying down, I picked up my phone to set an alarm. And while I'm setting my alarm, there's this slowly moving shadow of a dress floating in our kitchen. I saw its shadow on our tiles because the lights are on, and it reflected to the point where it was so visible. It went to the CR before it totally disappeared. I immediately stood up out of shock because of what I saw. And as I stood up, I investigated our kitchen without moving closer. I looked if there was a cloth hanging in the middle of our kitchen that can cast that shadow, but no. There's not a single thing, nor a piece of cloth that is placed in the middle of our kitchen. I remember when I was in holding after completing my basic training. I lived in a little barrack block with 3 other people. We shared a common room and bathroom, and there was this other room called plant room, which had like a hot water heater and like cleaning supplies. Also, there was a hole in the roof. We first started experiencing weird things about the door, like it would just be wide open after we would come back from the gym or work. And shortly after, we all experienced it open by itself in front of us, which was really disturbing to us and kind of creeped us out a few weeks later. 2 of the other guys had gone on leave to visit their families for the weekend, and it was a guy called Mossy and myself left for the weekend. On the Saturday night, I was in my room on my laptop listening to music. The new Travis Scott album just came out, and he sent me a message saying, "Did you hear that?" And I replied no. And he said the ghost door is slamming, and I said I can't hear it. Just ignore it, and hopefully it will stop. And to be honest, I was just kind of pretending not to be scared, because I really was. A few minutes go by, and I heard a loud slam, and instantly, Mossy messaged me and said, "Did you hear that?" I said, "Yeah. Is that the ghost door?" And after that, it was opening and slamming at this point. We're both so scared, and the time was about 6 o'clock. And this ghost door was slamming so loud, Mossy ran into my room, and we locked the door to my room, This door was slamming so loud we thought it was going to break. Then the worst part was we could hear running around the common room. It was so scary. This slamming and running went on until nearly 11 o'clock. I honestly thought this was the most horrific experience of my life. Then it all just stopped at like 11 o'clock. It was quiet and we fell asleep. Come the Monday morning, all the boys came back and were so creeped out by what we told them. And then before lunch, we had room inspections. And it was a training base thousands of Australian soldiers had gone through. The corporal doing our inspection lived in the building when he was doing his training. And we told him, and he said, "I believe you guys. Weird stuff used to happen all the time." So we decided to look up the history of the barracks and found out it was an immigration site for people who had lost their homes in the 50s after World War II and had fled to Australia. So creepy. Twas the night before Stranger Things Season 2 came out. As a huge fan, I was super excited and decided to stay up the whole night to watch it all. I was half awake, half asleep, watching YouTube, when I started hearing a light banging noise on the downstairs window, almost like a bird had flown into it and was flapping its wings against it. Now keep in mind, I live in a heavily wooded area, so it's not uncommon to have animals around your house at night. So naturally, I just ignored it as a bird. Probably about 2 or 3 minutes later, I hear 3 sets of 3 bangs, except it sounded more like a human doing it this time. So I tried to listen if I could hear anything, such as talking or laughing of sorts. I hear nothing at all, like absolutely nothing. So I kind of just ignored it again. Time goes on. 2 or 3 minutes later, more bangs. Except this wasn't like a bang a human could do without tools. Like it sounded like the equivalent of someone banging a hammer against the side of my house. At this point I'm scared shitless, and I'm thinking about calling the cops. But I decide I might just wait, and if it happens one more time, I will. This time, it's at least 5 minutes before the next knock. Now these ones were just like the last one, where it sounded like a hammer. Except it was all around my house. It sounded as if there were 100 people banging on the one area at once. The speed at which the bangs were happening was inhuman. At that point, I decided to run to the kitchen to grab a knife. I grabbed my dog and ran up to my room, locking the door. I calmed down for a second, and out of nowhere, my neighbour texts me, asking if I hear the banging too. So at this point, I know I'm not dreaming. At that point, I decided to call 911, as the knocking was still happening. And I'd say a minute later, the knocking stops. Soon after, a few cops came and searched the entire house, yard, and a decent bit of the woods. They looked on the windows and sidings for any sort of handprint or any sort of proof someone was knocking. Absolutely nothing. Now this is the part that really gets me. Earlier that night it was raining, so the ground was quite muddy. So they looked for any sort of shoe prints or animal prints. Absolutely nothing, only prints were their own. Years later, about 2 weeks ago, actually, I was walking through the woods grabbing my motion-activated camera to check the footage. It's about 7 PM, so by no means is it dark out, but it's starting to get a little bit. I'm a decent way into the woods at this point, when I hear this god-awful, I don't even know what to call it. It was like wailing, but so damn loud, with some screeches afterwards. The scratches afterwards almost sounded like someone just screaming, but more high and more intense. Like it was so goddamn loud and so terrible sounding. No human could make a noise like that. There was absolutely no way. After that, I hopped on my ATV and gunned it home, not looking back. No joke, when I got home, I checked my phone, and that same neighbour that asked if I heard the knocking texted me while I was in the woods and asked if I heard some sort of screaming. I have absolutely no idea what this could be, but I know I sure as hell don't want to run into it. My dad's house is very new. We built it ourselves. At the time this took place, it was barely a year old. Our land, however, is old. We've seen ghosts there before. Lots of weird stuff happens. It's also a bit swampy in the woods. It goes from grassy fields to swampy woods pretty fast on the south end of our land, and that's the area my window faces. I was 10 or 11, laying in bed one night. My dad was going on a business trip. I was home alone with Mom. Well, being a 10-year-old kid, I didn't really like sleeping that much. But it was late, so I was trying at least. I look out my window above the forest and see a floating blue orb. The logical part of my brain kicks in. Is my uncle spotlighting a raccoon? No, it's a blue ball, not a yellow or white light. What is this? I look at it for a minute before I run to get my mom. She was up late reading a novel, so I pulled her back to my room and told her to look at the orb. It had disappeared. She told me it was my overactive imagination and tucked me into bed again. I rolled over dejected, still unable to sleep. I'm going to guess about 10 minutes later, I look outside again and the orb is back, but a little closer. It's hovering in front of the trees, a bit lower. It's not any brighter, just closer. So I ran to get Mom again, who was still awake. By the time she gets back to my room, it's gone again. This happens a few more times, each time the orb getting closer. My mom had gotten very annoyed with me and told me not to bother her again after the 4th or 5th time. I'm laying in bed, looking out the window, when it appears directly outside the glass. I'm frozen in fear. What is it? What did it want? Was it going to hurt me? Why? It floated through my window, into my room. It is an orb, but it's not completely illuminating my room. It's just a faint glow. It keeps floating closer to me until it's at the foot of my bed, and I black out. I woke up sometime later, not sure exactly. The moon is still in the same general location, so not too long. I run to my window to see if the orb is still there, but instead I'm greeted with a flash of memory from some other time. A boy, my age, short blonde hair, green eyes, a smile. A storm and darkness. I remember hitting the floor, and then I woke up the next morning. This isn't the first time I saw the boy. I had seen him in a dream before, when I was a little girl. But I won't get into that here, since that was a dream and not a real encounter. This happened years ago, when I was a kid. I was at my grandparents' house. The way their house was set up, you could walk straight from the door through the living room, kitchen and den area, and that's where 2 back doors were. One led to the carport, one led literally directly into the woods. But I grew up in the country and spent a lot of time in the woods, so it wasn't weird. I had a really bad stomachache, severe acid reflux as a kid, so again, pretty normal. But to deal with the pain, they put Coca-Cola in my sippy cup, since it had been kind of a family tradition or something, to cure stomach pain with soda. I don't know their logic. They weren't exactly geniuses. I remember walking down to the den, to the back door that led into the woods. I stepped outside off the ramp, and there was a man, very well dressed, in a grey suit. I started talking to him, and I remember the woods starting to disappear and turn into a white room. It was really bizarre. But I was super calm for some reason. He asked me if I was ready to go. I didn't ask where or why. I didn't argue, really. I just said, no, I'm waiting on my mama. She's picking me up at 3 o'clock, and it's already 1 o'clock, so I don't want to miss her. And he just smiled. He nodded, and I remember falling out of the room and hitting the ground. After that, I just know what my parents have told me. I was sent to children's hospital because I started screaming about my stomach and throwing up, etc. I had to get my stomach pumped, and I was diagnosed with chronic gastritis and acid reflux. And since then, I haven't been allowed to drink anything carbonated, just in case. This is the only strong memory I have of the man, as of right now. I feel like I've seen him since, but I'm not sure where or when. I'll keep you updated if I ever remember. This happened to me and my friend, whom I was texting while this happened. My friend refuses to talk about this incident and will straight up walk away if I mention it in front of her. This still freaks me out, and I've experienced a lot of stuff, but this was by far one of my clearest and most intense experiences. I was 15 years old. There was some stuff I was going through. My parents were recently divorced, depression problems, but nothing truly awful, I guess. It was late. I was dealing with some pretty bad insomnia. I was texting my best friend. I can't remember what we were talking about, but I remember looking over at the corner of my room and seeing a tall shadow. About 6 to 7 feet tall. I freeze. I'm thinking to myself, okay, shadow, tree shadow, there's a tree outside. I slowly turn my head to look out the window. There's no way the tree can be casting this shadow. There's too much wind. I look back over at it, and it's a very still shadow. I texted my friend, Lynn, there's something in my room and I'm very scared. Getting really bad feelings from it. Directly after I send the text, the shadow dissipates. Just kind of fades away, as does the feeling of dread. Lynn texts me back. There's something here too. A really tall shadow in the corner of my room. I'm freaking out. Her bedroom had no windows, so there's no way she could mistake it for a tree shadow. A few minutes after I get the text, I felt that sense of dread returning. There's the shadow again, standing at the foot of my bed. My breathing gets super laboured, and I feel a panic attack coming on. All of a sudden, my phone battery drops from 80ish to 0 and dies. Panic attack comes on strong, and I jump for my phone charger next to my bed. I plug my phone in, looking for the shadow I took my eyes off just for maybe a second, but it's gone. Phone comes back on, jumps right back up to where it was before it died. I keep it plugged in just in case. I text Lynn. I think it killed my phone battery. What the fuck? I'm scared. About 10 minutes later, she replies. It was standing next to my bed. It was all black. I'm so scared. It killed my phone battery too, but it's fine now. It's gone again though. So, I started putting it together. There's a few minutes between jumps. It seems to be following the texts. I start texting anyone and everyone I can, just random bullshit. How are you? Been a while. You okay? Etc. Maybe I can confuse it, stretch it out. Holy shit, that was a bad idea. My bed starts shaking violently. My headboard is banging against the wall. My blanket gets ripped off the bed, and I can see it standing tall at the foot of my bed. I have a flight or fight reaction and jump off my bed towards my bedroom door and light switch. As I'm leaping over the door, I feel a very, very cold hand touch my ankle, almost pulling me back towards my bed. I yank open my door and turn my light on at the same time, and it flickers for a moment, temporarily blinding me, and the bulb shatters everywhere. I scream and run across the hall to my rom's room, and I start sobbing. And she has the audacity to laugh at me. I'm freaking out, scared of the demon monster shadow in my room that blew my light bulb, and she laughs. I get angry and tell her I'm not sleeping in there tonight unless I get a new bulb. She promises to buy me a new bulb the next day and gives me the mag light and tells me to sleep in the living room. So I creep into the bedroom to grab my phone charger and run to the living room and turn all the lights on. After a few days, I started sleeping in my bedroom again, but I had to get a new bulb and sleep with the flashlight on for a long time. So, yeah. Lynn refuses to talk about it. Nobody else experienced it, and nobody ever believes it. I still can't walk to my bed in the dark without feeling that hand on my ankle. This was around 2015, not sure what month, but it was around 11 at night. I was driving from my dad's place to my mom's. I've said this a couple of times now, but my dad has 75 acres of spooky ass land where most of my stories take place. Anyway, I was driving. I had just started down the long driveway when I felt like I was being watched. Not cool, but it happens more often than you would believe. I'm nearing the highway when I see a dark shape at the edge of the woods. Oh well, probably a deer. I shake it off. We have tons of wildlife in the area, from deer to panthers to the occasional bear. And then it starts chasing me. Keep in mind, please, that this shit is practically normal in my mind. I have tons of weird shit that happens, and it's not like it was just barreling at me. It just moved after my car, staying at the edge of the woods. So, I keep my pace. I turn onto the highway and speed up to 50 or so. I keep noticing something in my peripheral though. So, I slow down and start looking for what it could be. A few yards behind me, I see this huge dog. I grew up with large dogs. My aunt had a Saint Bernard mix growing up, and I've had various large dogs. This thing was literally the size of my car. I know I mentioned bears before, but bears don't chase cars, and we only have black bears, which are like the most docile kind. Okay, now I'm freaking out. I gun it, releasing a long stream of curses and telling my car to get over it. I seemingly can't shake it for too long, so in an act of bravery, I pull over in a church parking lot, thinking maybe it's some sort of hell beast and it won't come into the light or onto church land. Holy shit, I was wrong. I stop and get my phone out to call my boyfriend. In that span of time, it catches up and jumps onto my car. I can see and feel and hear the metal popping and creaking, and I see a drool splatter onto my windshield. I scream, dropping my phone. It jumps off of my car onto the hood, where I get a glimpse of it before it goes into the cemetery and disappears. It was definitely a dog, built like a Rottweiler pit mix, but darker and larger. It was solid black, with paws the size of dinner plates. It had a huge head, almost the size of my car windows. I don't know why it decided to leave me alone, but it did, and I'm so thankful. I called my boyfriend. He calmed me down and listened, and told me when I got home I should take pictures. And I did, or I tried at least. By the time I got to Mom's, the only thing left was a single dent in the roof of my car and some faint claw marks that were more like indentations in the metal. Sorry guys, I don't have the pictures anymore. So this happened to my dad, who's very skeptical of literally everything. He still can't explain this though. Timeline, I'd say it was 2015 or 16, so I was 16 or 17, pretty recent. My dad has some anger issues, so one night after a fight with my stepmom, he left and went for a walk. We own 75 acres or so, and we've owned this land for a good 30 years at least. No neighbours for quite some distance, and even then, I'm from a small community, and we're on a first name basis with all of our neighbours for 5 miles or so. Most of them are my cousins somehow. So we went for a walk behind our house. We live towards the back of the property, with woods surrounding us except for a neighbour's empty cow field. As he got closer to the woods on the left of our house, he started hearing music. It was too faint to make out, but he was concerned that we had trespassers. So he kept walking towards it. He was very deep in the woods when he noticed it had moved west, so he jumped the fence into the pine forest. This went on for a while. Every time he got close to it, it moved in a different direction. He ended up walking about 4 miles, all the way across 4 different property lines of forest and field, and onto a country road. His phone was dead, but my uncle was driving that road, so we stopped to give him a lift. This is one of the many times we've heard bizarre music and sounds coming from the woods. It comes from different sides, different volumes and styles. And no, none of our neighbours throw parties. Even if they did, we would know about it. Word travels in small communities like that. Before we bought this 75 acres, there was a lovely older couple who had all of it. Back then, it was called the Mayan community because it was a large chunk of land and they had owned for years. And if you're from the south, you'll understand the importance of having communities like that. My grandparents bought it. It eventually became known as the white community since all of my kinfolk live on it to this day. After they bought the land, the old man got really sick and died. I'm honestly not sure what he had. Other people, though, when they lose their routine, tend to pass on. It's sad but true. It happened to my great-grandmother as well. She got sick and lost the ability to keep a routine, and she died. Anyway, ever since he died, my grandma sees this person walking down the old fence line really early in the morning. She always sits on the back porch in the morning to smoke, and she watches the person walk from the back field up the old cattle fence, and he disappears when he hits the tree line that separates the field from the yard. She's taken to liking him, and she believes it's Mr. Mayan, making sure the fences are still good. Because once you get in a routine, it's not easy to stop. He never does anything else, just checks the fence. I hope he enjoys his afterlife. My sister has a poltergeist that we call George. It's questionable if he's actually a poltergeist, or just a spirit, or something else, but he's been around for at least 10 years. His name is George, and he kind of appeared when we built our new house. I assume due to family issues that created a negative enough energy, he was created, or was able to feed off of it enough to become more steady. I was the first one to notice him. It started with the house creaking, lights flickering in my room, and glasses in the kitchen thinking together at night. It's just the house settling, is what I told myself. It's just weird electrical issues, my dad told me. It's just your imagination, my mom told me. Yeah, okay, whatever. I started hearing actual footsteps at night, and car doors slamming outside at weird hours. It's just the house settling. It's people going to the bathroom or getting water. It's just neighbours and the way the sound carries over the forests and fields. Bullshit, but okay. A few other experiences happened not surrounding George, and slowly, over time, more of my family started believing me. It kind of became a joke of sorts. Hey, where's my tape measure? I left it on the bar. George probably took it. And so whenever we lost something and found it in a weird place, it was George. There was one time he took a biscuit, which I guess could have been a child, but it's more fun to blame the ghost. Then it started getting more violent. If Dad was in a pissy mood, something would usually come flying at his head. Some of the more notable occurrences happened in the kitchen when he would be cooking. Pots, pans, and cookie sheets have all come out of their assigned areas and smacked him in the head, which makes him more angry, but he usually leaves the house for a bit when that happens. We always blame George. He just blames whoever put the dishes up for not putting them up correctly. Doors started slamming, and furniture started moving around, and glasses started shattering for no reason. And while the parents brush it off as normal occurrences and don't really think George is real, the kids know. A big thing happened one time. All the kids were in bed, but their closet light was on. We were all arguing about who was going to turn it off because nobody wanted to get up. And we saw a pale arm come out of the closet and flick the light switch off. Needless to say, we didn't sleep much that night. For the longest time, I thought he was attached to me because stuff always happens around me, and I saw it the most. But after I moved out, I guess he attached himself to my little sister. So things have happened at both parents' houses, like the stuff described above, and some mild stuff at my mom's house. House creaks, knocking, doorknobs rattling, windows banging, glasses breaking, weird electrical things, and objects getting moved around. Always my sister's things, never my mom's. Mom actually refuses to believe George is real, despite being present for many of the occurrences. Over the years, George has kind of become part of my sister's daily routine. She communicates with him pretty regularly, usually by knocking on the wall. She leaves some food on her plate when she gets done to kind of offer it to him. She has a small area in her room that she leaves open and clean for him. When he gets loud at night, she tells him to be quiet, and he listens. She rather enjoys his company most of the time. She doesn't feel so alone. So when I was little, like 6, my family got a puppy we named Frank. Frank was intensely protective of my siblings and I, and he once literally almost died saving my brother and I from a creep. So Frank was a very good boy. As I got older, I struggled with night terrors, PTSD, and severe anxiety. Frank was there for me through everything. He learned how to sense panic attacks and anxiety attacks, and he would stand by me and comfort me when I needed it. Frank slept in my room, and when I had bad nightmares, he would either lay back to back with me until I calmed down, or he would find a gentle way to wake me up. Frank lived to be an impressive 16 years old, and was beginning to lose his ability to walk when he passed. But he insisted on sleeping in my bed, and he would crawl over to me when I needed it, so he could keep taking care of me. After Frank passed away, the nightmares came back worse than ever. Specifically, a lot of nightmares about losing him. But I noticed I would still wake up at midnight, oftentimes to the feeling of a warm presence pressed against my back, and a few times I was certain I heard Frank's quiet snoring. During the 6 months or so after he died, I learned how to cope better with the PTSD on my own, and his presence slowly faded away. There were still a few instances of him protecting me, like hearing a phantom barking that stopped me from tripping down the stairs, or feeling pushed out of the way when something could have fallen on me. The last night I got to see Frank was in a dream. I was running from something when it cornered me. I remember being terrified, frozen in place, when suddenly Frank came out of nowhere, barking and running at the threat. He scared it off, then sat with me as I calmed down. I realised it was a dream and knew Frank had come back to be my protector one last time. I haven't seen Frank since, but I know for a fact he's up in doggy heaven, bossing angels around and watching out for me. I've grown up with paranormal activity. Things falling off shelves, electronics turning on and off, whispers, animals freaking out over nothing, shadows. Some instances are freakier than others, but mostly harmless stuff. It got to the point where something would happen and my family would just shrug and say it was the family ghost. There were a few things that bothered me. I always closed my closet doors every single night before bed, but by morning, somehow they would always be open. This always freaked me out the most, and even into adulthood, I get really anxious if my closet is open. Whenever a pet that was very close to us died, the activity would pick up and become more aggressive. During those times, I felt unsafe and uncomfortable in my childhood home. I saw shadows more often, and the activity was more frequent. Instead of the TV just turning on, for example, it would turn on to full blast volume in the middle of the night, waking everyone up. When I finally moved out, I noticed that the activity stopped. It was so much easier to fall asleep. I felt that weight gone. But it didn't last. After about 6 months, activity started again. Small things I brushed off, but after a while, felt heavy, like something was watching, and every single night something would occur. My family mentioned not really noticing anything weird happening in their home anymore. They felt like something was missing. It was such a huge part of everyday life. It's been about 10 years since then. I'll move to a new place. It's quiet for a couple months, and then pictures are flying off walls. Whispers start, shadows are seen. My partner has only been with me for 2 years now, and is a super denier of all things paranormal. But we both heard something whispering his name one night. Does anyone have any idea what could be happening or potentially following me from place to place? I always thought that entities could attach themselves to places, people or things, but find it weird when I move and it disappears for a month or 6. and then activity slowly picks up again and escalates the longer I stay in one place. I've never felt unsafe other than when a pet member close to me in the household has passed away for a brief moment of time.